The Pacific Ocean covers more than 60 million square miles. And yet, what if beneath those restless waves lies the greatest secret in human history? Not a reef, not a chain of islands, but an entire world erased. A continent so vast it dwarfed South America. A civilization so advanced it may have seeded the very roots of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Maya. And then, in a single night of fire and storm, it vanished, leaving behind only fragments, scattered myths, and monuments that defy explanation. For centuries, scholars dismissed the idea as fantasy, but stories of a drowned homeland echo from Polynesia to India, from the temples of Mexico to the flood myths of Mesopotamia. Could they all be remembering the same forgotten cradle, a motherland called Moo? Tonight we step into that silence, into the space where maps end and memory begins, where glowing ruins rise in imagination and the line between history and legend dissolves. Join me now as we follow the whispers across oceans and centuries. Welcome to the story of Moo, the forgotten cradle of all civilizations. The Pacific at night is vast and silent, a black expanse where the stars seem to fall into the water. Waves roll endlessly, their rhythm echoing through millennia. Somewhere beneath that shifting surface, legends whisper of a land now forgotten, a cradle of civilization swallowed whole. Its name drifts through myths and manuscripts like a ghost, Moo. For centuries, sailors have carried tales of islands that appear and vanish, of coastlines swallowed after storms, of voices carried on the wind across the open ocean. Polynesian navigators recited chants about homelands beyond the horizon, lands that trembled and disappeared beneath the sea. In southern India, ancient Tamil poetry speaks of Kumari Kandam, a kingdom that once stretched across the Indian Ocean, lost to rising waves. In Greece, Plato's dialogues gave us Atlantis, a mighty empire sunk in a single night of catastrophe. Different names, different places, yet the same haunting motif emerges, the ocean claiming entire worlds. Moo enters this chorus as the most enigmatic of all. Unlike Atlantis, it has no single literary source. Unlike Kumari Kandam, it has no national tradition that preserves it intact. Instead, Moo is pieced together from fragments, speculative archaeology, whispered temple lore, scattered similarities in myth and symbol. It is a phantom continent glimpsed in echoes, reconstructed by explorers and mystics who insisted that the roots of humanity lie deeper than we think. What does it mean to call a place the cradle of civilizations? Archaeologists often point to the fertile river valleys, the Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, the Indus, the Yellow River. In these basins, humans first gathered in large numbers, cultivated grain, built cities, invented writing, and raised temples to gods. Yet Moo, if it existed, would overturn this model entirely. It suggests that civilization did not begin in rivers, but on the open ocean, on a continent so ancient it predates the pyramids of Egypt and the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. The legend paints Moo not as a scatter of villages, but as a unified land. In James Churchward's later writings, he claimed it supported more than 60 million people, all living under a single system of government and religion. Imagine a civilization that never fractured into competing empires, but stood in balance. Its energies devoted not to conquest, but to knowledge. Agriculture, astronomy, navigation, architecture. To believers, Moo is not just older than Egypt or Sumer, but more advanced. And yet, if Moo was once the center of human life, where are its ruins? Why does the Pacific floor show no pyramids or temples? This absence is the paradox at the heart of the legend. Some argue that cataclysm erased every trace. Volcanic fire, earthquakes, and tsunamis reducing stone cities to rubble in a single night. Others suggest we have not looked deeply enough. Modern sonar mapping has revealed only a fraction of the ocean floor, and vast trenches remain unexplored. Could a drowned city still lie hidden beneath sediment, waiting for discovery? Flood myths across cultures lend weight to the possibility. the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh tells of a deluge sent by gods to cleanse the earth. The Hebrew Bible speaks of Noah and the ark. In Polynesia, gods hurl waves that consume islands. Aboriginal Australians tell of coasts that once extended far beyond the sea's present edge, their oral traditions later confirmed by geological mapping. These stories may be symbolic, but many align with real geological events. The rapid rise of sea levels at the end of the Ice Age, when glaciers melted and drowned coastlines worldwide. Science, too, provides haunting images. Satellite mapping has revealed Doggerland, the now submerged plain that once connected Britain to mainland Europe. Sonar surveys of Southeast Asia confirm the existence of Sunderland, a vast Ice Age continent swallowed by rising seas. Both regions remind us that entire worlds can vanish from the map, not in a single night, but in a span short enough to live in cultural memory. If such disappearances happened in the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, why not in the Pacific as well? To imagine Moo is to imagine a lost chapter of humanity's story. A continent erased, its survivors scattered, its memory refracted through myth. Perhaps its cities aligned with constellations now forgotten, temples that resonated with sound, or knowledge passed down through chants and symbols. Perhaps what we call civilization did not begin in Mesopotamia or Egypt, but there, beneath the waves, in a world whose ruins glow only in imagination. And so Moo waits, not in museum cases or textbook pages, but in the shadowed space between memory and geology. To speak of it is to cross the boundary where science and myth blur, where the ocean becomes both grave and archive. Was Moo truly the forgotten cradle of all civilizations? Or is it a mirror of our own desire to find origins deeper, older, more unified than history admits? This is where our journey begins. To trace the story of Moo, we must follow its footprints from the jungles of Mexico to the temples of India, from flood myths to stone tablets. We must listen for echoes across oceans, fragments of a motherland erased but not silenced. And our first step takes us to the Yucatan, where a restless 19th century archaeologist believed he had found Moo's first surviving whisper carved into the glyphs of the Maya. In the latter half of the 19th century, when archaeology was still more adventure than science, a curious figure walked through the tangled ruins of the Yucatan. Augustus Le Plongeon was not a conventional scholar. He was an eccentric mix of explorer, photographer, linguist, and visionary. Where others saw crumbling temples swallowed by jungle, he saw threads that reached back to a civilization even older than Egypt, a civilization that, he claimed, had once been the source of all others. Moo Le Plongeon arrived in Mexico during an era when the Maya world was still largely a mystery to outsiders. The jungles of Yucatan hid immense cities: Uxmal, with its elegant pyramid of the magician, Chichen Itza, with its vast ball courts and temples, and Izamal, the city of hills, where pyramids lay buried beneath mounds. Most of these sites were overgrown, their plazas filled with vines and roots pushing through carved stone. To walk among them was to feel time folding back on itself. Le Plongeon, trained in photography, made some of the earliest visual records of these ruins. His glass plate images captured pyramids still half buried, stelae standing amid jungle, and temples that looked less like relics than living presences. But beyond documenting, he sought to interpret. He believed the glyphs carved into Maya monuments and painted in codices were not merely local records, but windows onto a forgotten world. In his translations, often rejected by later scholars, he claimed to find references to a great catastrophe, a drowned homeland from which the Maya ancestors had fled. That homeland, he said, was Moo, a continent once rising from the Pacific. For Le Plongeon, the Maya were not a civilization that developed in isolation, but heirs to a more ancient world. Their architecture, mathematics, and astronomy were survivals, fragments of a legacy that stretched across oceans. He pointed to motifs carved in stone, serpent gods winding through temple walls, feathered deities spreading wings, solar discs radiating above kings. These, he argued, were not uniquely Maya, but echoes of symbols found in Egypt and India. Could such parallels exist without a shared origin? To him, the answer was no. He wove a narrative where the serpent of Quetzalcoatl was kin to the Egyptian Uraeus, where the solar imagery of Ra found a twin in Maya iconography. The bridge between them was Moo. Le Plongeon's most dramatic claim concerned Queen Moo and Prince Co, legendary figures he believed to be historical Maya rulers. In his telling, Queen Moo fled to Egypt after the fall of her kingdom, bringing with her the knowledge of Mu. There she was remembered as Isis, the goddess of life. Prince Co, slain in Yucatan, became the model for Osiris. Through this extraordinary leap, Le Plongeon placed Mu not only in the Pacific, but at the root of Egyptian civilization. To him, the Nile and the Yucatan were threads of the same tapestry. Mainstream archaeologists dismissed these claims as fantasy, and indeed his translations of Maya glyphs were often flawed. At the time, the true decipherment of the script had not yet been achieved. Only in the late 20th century did scholars crack the code using phonetic analysis and cross-referenced inscriptions. But Le Plongeon was less concerned with linguistic precision than with a grand vision. He saw in the Maya ruins a portal to a story much larger than Mesoamerica, a story that could only be explained if a forgotten cradle of civilization once existed. What makes his work fascinating, even today, is not its accuracy but its ambition. In an age when most European scholars viewed the Americas as younger and less significant than the Old World, Le Plongeon insisted the opposite, that the roots of civilization stretched from the New World into the very foundations of global culture. He inverted the accepted narrative, challenging Egypt's primacy and suggesting that the torch of knowledge had first burned in a land now drowned. Science, of course, draws firmer lines. Archaeologists can trace the development of Maya society through pottery sequences, carbon dating, and inscriptions. The earliest known cities in Mesoamerica rose around 1000 BC, long after Sumer and Egypt had flourished. Yet Le Plongeon's vision resonates because it dares to ask a question science cannot fully answer. Why do so many cultures, oceans apart, share myths of floods, sky gods, and serpent deities? To walk through Chichen Itza under Le Plongeon's gaze is to see not just a pyramid rising toward the sun, but a message carried from a lost homeland. The stepped terraces recall ziggurats of Mesopotamia. The alignment to solstices mirrors Stonehenge. The serpent descending the pyramid on the equinox seems less local ritual than universal symbol. In his imagination, all these echoes converged in Mu. Though his theories never gained acceptance, they set the stage for others. He gave Mu its first modern life, transforming scattered myths into a hypothesis that an entire continent, once flourishing with knowledge, had been erased but left its fingerprints on civilizations around the world. The seed he planted would be picked up decades later by James Churchward, who expanded it into an elaborate narrative of tablets, cataclysm, and global diaspora. Augustus Le Plongeon's Maya puzzle was never solved, but it endures as the moment the legend of Mu stepped into modern consciousness. Standing among the jungle ruins, he heard whispers others ignored. He looked at carvings of serpents and saw not only gods, but memories of a drowned continent. And whether his translations were mistaken or not, he forced the world to confront a possibility both haunting and intoxicating, that what we call the beginning of civilization may only be the afterglow of something much older. Sometimes the greatest stories of lost worlds are not discovered in the earth, but whispered in temples, hidden in crumbling tablets, and carried by the fervour of one man's conviction. For James Churchward, a British officer posted in colonial India in the late 19th century, the seed of the Mu legend was planted not on the battlefield, but in a sanctuary where outsiders were rarely admitted. There, in the presence of a priest who trusted him more than most foreigners, he was shown what he later called the Nakal tablets. According to Churchward, these were not massive stone monoliths, but delicate tablets made of a strange composite material. Claystone hardened with minerals, surprisingly light, etched with symbols unlike any script he had ever seen. The priest explained that only a handful of men alive could still read them, for they preserved a tongue older than Sanskrit, older than hieroglyphs, older even than the first traces of cuneiform. This was the Naga Maya language, and its home was Moo. Fascinated, Churchward persuaded the priest to teach him. For years he laboured over the cryptic signs, memorising curls, dots and spirals, learning how symbols shifted meaning depending on their context. He claimed to master the script and through it to open a window onto a civilization erased from the world. What emerged from those tablets, he later wrote, was nothing less than the first history of humanity. Churchward described Moo as the motherland of all civilizations, a continent that once stretched across the Pacific, home to 64 million people ruled by a single law and faith. The tablets, he said, recorded their wisdom, their science, their religion, their achievements. They spoke of agriculture that yielded plenty, astronomy that mapped the heavens with clarity, navigation that spanned oceans, and even knowledge of energies hidden in nature, forces of magnetism, resonance, and light. To him, the people of Moo, the Nakal, were not primitives, but custodians of knowledge far surpassing anything of his own time. His writings bristle with vivid images. He pictured cities laid out in harmony with the stars, temples whose architecture mirrored cosmic patterns, and vast plains of fertile soil irrigated by channels that made harvests abundant. In his imagination, Moo was not a collection of tribes or small kingdoms, but a world-spanning civilization unified in purpose, devoted to knowledge and balance. Unlike Egypt or Rome, Moo's glory was not conquest but harmony. But every paradise in myth carries its shadow. The tablets, he claimed, also spoke of catastrophe, volcanic fire erupting from beneath the sea, earthquakes shattering the land, tidal waves swallowing cities whole. In a single night, Moo broke apart and sank, leaving only scattered islands as bones of a once living body. Millions perished, but some survived. They sailed across the world, carrying fragments of their culture to Asia, to the Americas, to the shores of Africa. According to Churchward, this diaspora explained why so many civilizations share uncanny similarities in architecture, symbols, and myth. The appeal of this narrative in the early 20th century was enormous. In the 1920s and 30s, when Churchward published The Lost Continent of Moo and its sequels, the world was hungry for mysteries. Atlantis had captured the imagination of the West. Moo offered an even larger stage. Readers devoured his descriptions of a forgotten empire whose fingerprints lingered in the pyramids of Egypt, the temples of Angkor, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, and the glyphs of the Maya. His maps showed Moo sprawling across the Pacific, anchoring a web of connections between cultures otherwise thought to be isolated. Yet the central problem remained. The tablets themselves were never produced. No museum ever housed them. No photographs or rubbings were shared. They existed only in Churchward's testimony. To skeptics, this was damning. To believers, it was a test of faith. Was Churchward a visionary preserving knowledge entrusted to him, or a fabulist spinning stories from fragments of myth? The absence of the tablets turned them into an enigma, perhaps more compelling than their presence ever could have been. Still, even without physical proof, elements of his story resonate in surprising ways. Archaeology has revealed that sea levels rose dramatically at the end of the Ice Age, drowning coastal settlements worldwide. Comparative mythology shows flood narratives repeated across continents. Modern sonar mapping has uncovered strange features on the Pacific seafloor, ridges, plateaus, seamounts that inspire speculation about drowned lands. While science stops short of endorsing Churchward's claims, these discoveries keep the legend alive. Churchward himself insisted he was not inventing fantasy. He framed his work as preservation, the last record of a civilization too vast to have left no trace. He argued that Moo's true ruins lay not in the Pacific floor, but in the surviving cultures of the world. Look at Polynesian navigation, he said, or Mesoamerican pyramids, or Indian cosmology. These were fragments of Moo, preserved against time. For his critics, Churchward's vision blurred the line between scholarship and myth-making. Yet for his readers, it was precisely this blending that gave Moo its power. His Nakal tablets may never have been authenticated, but they became a symbolic artifact, an imagined archive that invited audiences to picture a forgotten origin for all human civilization. Churchward carried Le Plongeon's spark into a blazing fire. What had been speculation in Maya glyphs became, in his hands, a full cosmology of a lost motherland. Moo was no longer a whisper. It was a continent with cities, people, laws, and a catastrophic end. He gave it form, scale, and drama, and with that he ensured its survival in imagination. To trace his vision further, we must step onto the maps he drew, where Moo stretches across the Pacific like a shadow continent, shattered in a single night and erased from the world's memory. In the 1920s, James Churchward unfurled a vision that challenged how people imagined the very face of the earth. He claimed that Moo was not a myth, nor a small island misremembered through legend, but a full continent, larger than South America, once standing proudly in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. His maps, hand-drawn in his books, stretched the mind's eye across the vast blue expanse, painting it not as empty sea, but as fertile land, with rivers, valleys, and 7 great cities. To Churchward, Moo's geography was precise. He described plains rich with soil, irrigated by canals that crisscrossed like veins through a living body. These canals, he said, ensured harvests that fed tens of millions. The continent's western edge touched the Marianas. Its eastern boundary brushed Easter Island, while Hawaii and Mangaia marked its northern and southern limits. If one looked at a modern map of the Pacific and imagined every island as the peak of a drowned mountain range, one could almost trace the ghost of his Moo beneath the waves. This picture resonated powerfully in an era before modern oceanography. At that time, the Pacific was still a mystery, its depths unmapped, its floor unseen. People knew only what sailors glimpsed above the surface. Countless islands, some volcanic, some coral, some seemingly rising and sinking with the tides. To a 1920s audience, the idea that these islands were scattered remnants of a once great continent felt plausible. Churchward insisted that Moo's destruction was sudden and absolute. He wrote that around 12,000 years ago, volcanic chains ignited across the land, earthquakes split the earth, and tidal waves surged across its coasts. In a single night, the continent was consumed by fire and then swallowed by the sea. 50 million square miles of fertile land vanished. Its mountains became the archipelagos of Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia. Its cities, its monuments, its people were reduced to myths carried across oceans. For readers of his time, the story found an uncanny echo in real disasters. Just 4 decades earlier, the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883 had horrified the world. Its explosion was heard 3,000 miles away. Tidal waves over 100 feet high obliterated coastal villages. The skies darkened, global temperatures fell, and sunsets turned blood red for months. If an island could vanish with such fury, why not a continent? Churchward's description of Moo's destruction, while geologically impossible as written, drew power from living memory of catastrophe. He further pointed to rising seas at the end of the Ice Age as supporting evidence. Around 12,000 years ago, melting glaciers raised ocean levels by more than 300 feet. Entire coastal plains were drowned. Science confirms this. Sonar mapping has revealed lost worlds like Doggerland in the North Sea, once connecting Britain to Europe, and Sunderland in Southeast Asia, once a vast landmass now reduced to islands. If Europe and Asia had lost continents to the ocean, why not the Pacific as well? To Churchward, these examples proved that his maps of Moo were not fantasy, but part of a global pattern. Yet geology eventually struck back. With the rise of plate tectonics theory in the mid-20th century, scientists demonstrated that the Pacific Basin is composed almost entirely of dense oceanic crust, not the lighter continental rock that floats above. Continents, they explained, cannot simply sink whole. They drift, collide, and reshape over millions of years. Sonar surveys of the Pacific floor revealed ridges, trenches, and volcanic arcs, but no plateau broad enough to support a lost continent. To mainstream science, this was decisive. Moo could not exist, and still the idea lingered. Churchward's maps offered something science could not: coherence. They explained why distant civilizations seemed to share architectural motifs, symbols, and myths. They provided a motherland from which Polynesian navigators, Maya architects, and Indian priests could all inherit fragments of memory. Even if the geology did not agree, the human imagination found his vision difficult to dismiss. Modern researchers, too, sometimes find curious details that keep the legend alive. Submarine plateaus like the Ontong Java or the Shatsky Rise are vast enough to spark speculation. Could they be remnants of something larger? While geology says they are volcanic in origin, their sheer size fuels the sense that the Pacific still hides secrets. And on the islands that remain, the megaliths of Nan Madol in Micronesia or the colossal Moai of Easter Island appear almost as monuments of defiance, as if the last peaks of Moo refused to let memory sink entirely. Churchward's map of Moo was not just a geographical claim, it was a narrative device, a stage on which the drama of human origins could be played. Whether or not the continent truly existed, his vision invited readers to imagine the Pacific not as emptiness, but as the erased heart of humanity's story. That invitation continues to echo. When we see a map of the Pacific today, part of us still wonders what lies beneath, hidden by miles of shifting blue. The deeper question is not whether Moo existed as Churchward drew it, but why the idea continues to compel us. We seem to crave the thought of a forgotten cradle, erased but not silenced. And even when science strips the Pacific of continents, it still feels like a veil over something hidden. What do you think? Could the Pacific truly hide the traces of a lost motherland, or is Moo only a mirror of our longing for deeper roots? Share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to know how you see the map of the vanished land. In 1921, the dry earth of central Mexico yielded a discovery that, for some, seemed to whisper in the same voice as Churchward's drowned continent. William Niven, a Scottish-born mining engineer turned self-taught archaeologist, was surveying land near San Miguel Amantla, not far from Mexico City. His work began with routine digs, shards of pottery, fragments of obsidian tools, and traces of pre-Columbian settlements. But then, deeper in the soil, he uncovered something entirely different, a collection of carved stone tablets unlike anything seen before. By the time his excavations ended, Niven had unearthed more than 1/200 of these artifacts. Flat, rectangular, and etched with strange designs, the tablets were neither clearly Aztec nor Maya. Their markings baffled the local scholars of his time. Some bore geometric patterns, grids, spirals, zigzags, while others depicted solar discs, stepped motifs, and curious humanoid forms. They looked both simple and sophisticated, as if drawn from a symbolic system with meaning that hovered just beyond reach. When sketches of the tablets reached James Churchward, he was electrified. To him, this was confirmation. The symbols, he insisted, matched those of the Nagamaya script he had studied in India. He declared that the tablets were records left by Moo's survivors, carried across the Pacific and preserved in Mexico long before the rise of Aztec or Maya culture. In his interpretation, Niven had stumbled upon fragments of Moo's library, hidden beneath the soils of the New World. This was a bold claim, and it was not without precedent in Churchward's framework. He believed that after Moo's cataclysmic destruction, survivors sailed across the oceans, carrying their knowledge to distant lands. Some, he argued, landed in the Americas, planting the seeds of civilizations that would later blossom into Olmec, Maya, and Aztec cultures. The Niven stones became, in his books, hard evidence of that transmission. They were the physical echoes of Moo, etched into stone thousands of years before Columbus ever crossed the Atlantic. Yet mainstream archaeology did not share his enthusiasm. The tablets lacked stratigraphic context. They were not found in intact layers associated with known cultures, but scattered in disturbed soils. Without clear dating, their age remained uncertain. Some scholars suggested they could be forgeries, produced to satisfy the appetite for lost continent narratives that surged in the early 20th century. Others believed they might be authentic but misinterpreted, artifacts of a little-known local culture, stripped of meaning once their context was lost. Still, even skeptics admitted the stones were curious. Many of the designs seemed to echo patterns found in distant places. Spirals similar to those carved in Neolithic Ireland, step motifs reminiscent of Andean temples, solar symbols resembling those of Mesopotamian seals. To archaeologists, this was coincidence, the product of human imagination responding in similar ways to universal experiences of sun, water, and cosmos. To Churchward's followers, it was the unmistakable fingerprint of a common origin. Over time, the story of the Niven stones only grew stranger. After Niven's death, much of his collection was lost. Some pieces were dispersed into private hands, others stored in museums with little attention. Many simply vanished. Today, only a handful remain accessible, their symbols still undeciphered. Without the full collection and without detailed excavation records, the mystery deepened. Were they authentic relics of an unknown pre-Columbian culture? Or were they, as Churchward believed, fragments of Moo's drowned archive? Modern technology has yet to resolve the question. Few of the surviving stones have undergone rigorous testing. Their age remains uncertain, their provenance hazy. And yet photographs and sketches of the lost tablets continue to circulate, sparking fascination among alternative historians and conspiracy theorists alike. To them, the stones are proof that archaeology has overlooked or deliberately ignored a deeper human past. For others, the significance of the Niven stones lies not in their authenticity, but in their symbolism. They represent a bridge between worlds, between science and speculation, between archaeology and myth. Whether carved by a forgotten Mexican culture or imagined as relics of Moo, they invite us to consider the possibility of connections across oceans long before Columbus. They ask us to look at patterns in art, in symbol, in story, and wonder if humanity's roots might be more entwined than we think. In the end, the Niven stones are less important for what they prove than for what they suggest. They remind us that history is full of gaps, that artifacts can emerge which do not fit neatly into established timelines. They challenge us to imagine, what if? What if a miner in Mexico really did hold in his hands a piece of a lost motherland? What if the stones were whispers of a civilization erased but not entirely forgotten? The mystery of the Niven stones remains unsolved. Yet in their silence, they continue to echo, and for those who see them as footprints of Moo, they point across the Pacific to other monuments that defy easy explanation. None are more haunting than the colossal Moai of Easter Island, statues that, according to local tradition, did not merely stand but walked. On a remote volcanic island in the southeastern Pacific, far from any continental shore, giants stand frozen in stone. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui as its people call it, is one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth. Its windswept slopes rise from an ocean that stretches in every direction, broken only by distant horizons. And scattered across that lonely land are the Moai, massive statues with elongated faces, solemn brows, and bodies half buried in the earth. They stand silent, gazing inland, guardians of a mystery that still unsettles archaeology. There are nearly 900 Moai known today. Some are modest in size, 2 or 3 meters tall. Others tower at over 10 meters, with a single unfinished giant at Rano Raraku Quarry that would have reached 20 meters in height had it been completed. The heaviest of these monoliths weighs over 80 tons. Carved from volcanic tuff, their surfaces are etched with faint details. Long ears, defined noses, sometimes crowned with red stone top knots, called pukau. They are not merely statues, but embodiments of ancestors, carriers of mana, the spiritual force that Polynesians believe infuses all life. Archaeologists generally agree that the Rapa Nui people built the Moai between the 13th and 16th centuries. The statues were quarried at Rano Raraku, carved directly from the bedrock, then detached and transported across the island to stone platforms called ahu. From there they watched over villages, standing as both protective spirits and symbols of clan prestige. But while their cultural purpose is understood, the question of how such immense stones were moved remains one of the island's most enduring enigmas. When early European explorers arrived and asked the islanders how the statues were transported, the reply was simple and strange. They walked. Generations of oral tradition repeated the same phrase. The Moai were not dragged, not pushed, but walked across the land with the help of mana. To Western ears, it sounded like myth. To the people of Rapa Nui, it was history. James Churchward seized upon this tradition. To him, the walking statues were evidence of a knowledge inherited from Moo. He believed the Rapa Nui carried fragments of their motherland's lost science, perhaps a mastery of energies that allowed stone to move as if alive. The story of statues walking, in his eyes, was not metaphor but memory, a distorted recollection of advanced techniques once common on Moo, now reduced to legend. Modern archaeology has attempted to solve the riddle with more earthly explanations. In the 1980s, Thor Heyerdahl suggested that the statues were laid flat on wooden sledges and dragged with ropes. Critics pointed out that such a method would have required massive quantities of timber, something Easter Island could scarcely supply given its limited forest cover. Others proposed log rollers, but again the scarcity of trees made this unlikely on a large scale. In 2012, archaeologists Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo tested a different approach, standing the statue upright and rocking it side to side with ropes attached to its head and base. With coordinated effort, teams were able to walk a replica Moai forward, step by step. To onlookers, the motion looked eerily lifelike, as if the statue were shuffling across the earth. Suddenly, the oral tradition made sense. The Moai did indeed walk, not through supernatural energy, but through clever engineering. And yet, even with this demonstration, the aura of mystery remains. How did the Rapa Nui achieve such coordination across uneven terrain, sometimes moving statues for miles? How did they balance the enormous weight without toppling the figures? And why devote such immense effort on such a small island to raise hundreds of giants whose gaze never leaves the land? For Churchward and those who follow the path of Moo, these questions only deepen the possibility that something older lingers here. They point to the sheer scale of the Moai compared to the resources of the island, the uncanny similarity of the statues to megalithic figures found in other parts of the world, and the resonance of the walking tradition with myths of lost energies. Perhaps they suggest the Moai were not simply local creations, but the last echoes of a monumental tradition born on a drowned continent. Adding to the mystery, some statues lie unfinished in the quarry, frozen in the act of emergence. Others rest face down along ancient roads, as if abandoned mid-journey. These silent failures hint at a society strained to its limits, yet still determined to raise the giants. For mainstream archaeology, this tells a story of ecological collapse, deforestation, overpopulation, and social stress. For those drawn to Moo, it suggests something different, that the Rapa Nui were struggling to preserve techniques they had inherited but no longer fully understood, their connection to the motherland fading with each generation. Today, visitors to Easter Island walk among the Moai with awe. They stand against the wind, their eyes blank yet piercing, their forms weathered but unbroken. They are not ruins in the usual sense, but presences, guardians that defy both time and explanation. To touch the stone is to feel not only the hands of the Rapa Nui, but perhaps the echo of something deeper, something carried across oceans from a homeland long erased. The Moai are only one piece of this puzzle. Across the world, in deserts, jungles, and valleys, rise pyramids. Monumental structures aligned with the heavens, constructed with precision, and repeating a form so consistent it seems like a signature. Were these two echoes of Moo, fingerprints of a blueprint carried outward by survivors of the forgotten cradle? Across deserts, jungles, and valleys, a single shape rises again and again, the pyramid. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza towers above the Nile, its limestone casing once gleaming like a beacon visible for miles. In Mexico, the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan stands in silence, aligned with celestial events that mark the calendar of its builders. In Guatemala, the Maya pyramids of Tikal pierce the jungle canopy, each temple doubling as an astronomical observatory. And in China's Shanxi province, massive earthen pyramids lie beneath fields, their slopes softened by centuries, but their form unmistakable. Mainstream archaeology explains this convergence as practical engineering. A pyramid, after all, is the most stable way to build high with stone or earth. But to those who study lost civilizations, the recurrence of this form across continents suggests something deeper, a blueprint carried from an earlier source. James Churchward argued that Mu was that source. To him, the pyramid was not a coincidence, but a cultural fingerprint of a forgotten motherland. The alignments strengthen the mystery. The Great Pyramid is oriented with astonishing accuracy to true north, deviating by only a fraction of a degree. At Teotihuacan, the Avenue of the Dead aligns with the setting of the Pleiades, a star cluster sacred in many cultures. Chichen Itza's Pyramid of Kukulkan casts a serpent-shaped shadow at the equinox, as though the feathered god descends from heaven to earth. In China, the White Pyramid near Shirain is aligned with the four cardinal directions, echoing the geometry of Giza. Such precision demands not only engineering skill, but also advanced astronomical knowledge. Could so many civilizations separated by oceans have developed these systems entirely independently? The similarities go beyond shape and alignment. Many pyramids were built not as tombs, but as cosmic markers. They mirror mountains, embodying the axis mundi, the connection between earth and sky. The stepped form suggests ascension, each tier a rung in the ladder between human and divine. In Mu, Churchward claimed, pyramids served as centers of both ritual and science, structures that harnessed natural forces and reflected the harmony of the cosmos. Survivors, he argued, carried this knowledge outward, replicating it in new lands. Consider the materials. At Giza, massive limestone and granite blocks, some weighing more than 50 tons, were transported and placed with millimeter precision. At Teotihuacan, the Pyramid of the Sun is filled with rubble, but faced with carefully angled stone, designed to withstand centuries of earthquakes. In Java, the Temple of Borobudur rises in 9 stacked levels, its design encoding Buddhist cosmology. Even in Polynesia, smaller step pyramids and raised platforms echo the same architectural principle. Was this simply convergent evolution in design, or fragments of a shared tradition? Speculation has extended further. Some researchers suggest pyramids may have functioned as more than ceremonial centers. Theories propose that their shape amplified telluric currents or vibrational frequencies of the Earth. The Great Pyramid's internal chambers, with their precise acoustics, resonate strongly to certain frequencies, leading some to wonder whether they were designed to manipulate sound or energy. While mainstream science rejects these ideas as pseudoscience, they remain part of the allure. Pyramids as not only monuments, but machines, remnants of a knowledge older than history itself. The persistence of pyramid building across time adds to the enigma. The earliest Egyptian pyramids date to the 3rd millennium BC, but Mesoamerican pyramids arose thousands of years later, seemingly without contact. And yet both traditions shared similar features: stepped sides, astronomical alignment, and ritual function. If Mu truly existed and its survivors spread across the world, this continuity would make sense. Each civilization remembering and reshaping fragments of the same inheritance. Even today, new discoveries keep the mystery alive. In Bosnia, claims of pyramid hills spark debate, though many geologists dismiss them as natural formations. Off the coast of Yonaguni in Japan, a submerged rock formation with stepped terraces raises questions of whether it could be a drowned pyramid. In Antarctica, satellite images show pyramid-like mountains, fueling speculation of buried structures beneath the ice. While these examples remain controversial, they highlight humanity's enduring fascination with the possibility that pyramids conceal a forgotten chapter of our story. For Churchward, all these sites were connected threads, stitched together by the memory of Moo. To him, pyramids were more than architecture. They were the signature of the mother civilization, proof that even after its destruction, Moo's legacy endured in stone. If the pyramids represent the architectural echo of Moo, then the question naturally shifts to the builders themselves. Who were these people who carried their knowledge across oceans? Were they simply humans like us, or beings remembered as gods and culture bringers in myths from every corner of the world? To seek the answer, we must step from stone to story, from structure to the people who built them, the mysterious Nakal, the children of Moo. Legends describe them as tall, noble, and harmonious, guided by a single law and a single faith. James Churchward named them the Nakal, the children of Moo. In his writings, the Nakal were not a scattered collection of tribes, but a unified civilization that lived in balance with the natural world. Their numbers, he claimed, reached into the tens of millions. Their society was not fractured by wars of conquest or rival kings, but organized into a cooperative system devoted to knowledge, agriculture, spirituality, and the forces of nature. To him, they were the idealized ancestors of all later human cultures. Churchward's account portrays them as advanced in ways that sound almost utopian. They cultivated the land with sophisticated irrigation, producing harvests sufficient to feed vast populations. They studied astronomy, charting the cycles of the stars and planets with a precision rivaling later civilizations. They navigated open oceans, using knowledge of currents, winds, and constellations long before the Polynesians set sail. Most provocatively, he claimed, they understood primary forces of nature, energies invisible to us now, but harnessed for agriculture, architecture, and possibly even transportation. If this seems fantastical, it is worth noting how myths from across the world echo these qualities. The Sumerians told of the Anunnaki, sky beings who descended to teach humanity writing, mathematics, and kingship. In Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztecs revered Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who brought knowledge, maize, and law. In India's Vedic hymns, the gods bestowed wisdom and technology, including the mysterious Vimanas, flying craft said to traverse the heavens. In Polynesia, the demigod Moai lifted islands from the sea and taught humans how to fish. The pattern repeats, figures described as other, not entirely human, arriving to guide, teach, and establish order. Could these be mythologized memories of the Nakal, remembered through different cultural lenses? Descriptions of their physical appearance also invite speculation. Churchward suggested they were tall, strong, and striking in presence, with features that later echoed in diverse populations around the world. This claim has been interpreted in many ways, as a suggestion of a shared ancient ancestry, as evidence of interbreeding between different human groups, or, in more speculative traditions, as a hint of beings not fully human. Some modern theories even link them to genetic anomalies, or propose they were hybrids between early Homo sapiens and mysterious visitors. An echo of the ancient astronaut hypothesis. Archaeology does not confirm such beings, but certain anomalies keep the imagination alive. Elongated skulls found in Peru, sometimes naturally deformed by binding, are occasionally interpreted as evidence of non-human ancestry. The colossal Olmec heads of Mexico, with their enigmatic features, invite speculation about unknown lineages. Even the statues of Easter Island, with their long ears and solemn faces, seem to hint at an ancestral archetype that transcends local culture. For believers in Moo, these are faint traces of the Nakal's presence across the globe. Equally striking is the spiritual worldview attributed to them. According to Churchward, the Nakal worshipped not a pantheon of quarrelsome gods, but a single great force that permeated all life, a unity of creation. This belief, he argued, spread to later traditions, the Polynesian mana, the Indian concept of prana, the Chinese qi. All are variations on the same theme, life as energy, the cosmos as an interconnected whole. If true, Moo may have been less a kingdom than a spiritual civilization, where science and religion were threads of the same fabric. Skeptics argue that this picture is idealized, more a projection of 19th and early 20th century utopian thought than historical fact. They point out that Churchward offered no verifiable evidence of the Nakal, no bones, no inscriptions, no cities preserved under the sea. His vision may reflect humanity's longing for a lost golden age rather than actual memory. And yet, even within mainstream anthropology, the universality of culture-bringer myths raises questions. Why do so many societies imagine their knowledge arriving from outside, from gods, giants, or strangers from afar? Why not more stories of gradual self-invention? One possibility is that the Nakal are not a literal lost race, but a symbolic one. They embody the memory of teachers and migrants who carried knowledge after real catastrophes. When Doggerland drowned, when Sunderland vanished beneath the rising seas, survivors must have fled, bringing fragments of their traditions to new shores. Over time, these ordinary migrants may have been mythologized into larger-than-life figures, remembered as gods, giants, or star beings. In this way, the Nakal could be less invention than exaggeration, the mythic form of real ancestors. And yet, the pull of the otherworldly remains strong. The idea of the Nakal as hybrids, part human, part divine, explains the uncanny leaps of knowledge in early civilizations. It bridges the gap between myth and archaeology, between flood legends and the sudden flowering of advanced cultures. Whether literal or metaphorical, they represent the same idea. Humanity did not rise alone. Something older, wiser, or more advanced set us on our path. Thus the question lingers: who were the people of Moo? Were they a real race erased by time, their bones ground into the ocean floor? Were they a collective memory of displaced survivors whose wisdom became myth? Or were they symbols of humanity's yearning for guidance, cast as gods and giants in the stories we tell? Whatever the answer, the Nakal embody Moo itself, both human and more than human, both real and imagined. To study them is to look into a mirror that shows not only what we were, but what we dream we could be, united, wise, in harmony with the forces of life. But every dream must contend with evidence. For each myth that elevates the Nakal, a scientist demands proof. Where are the ruins? Where are the bones? Where are the artifacts of Moo? The legend must pass into the crucible of skepticism, where geology and archaeology test the story against the hard bedrock of the Earth. The Pacific Ocean stretches across more than 60 million square miles, its surface serene, yet concealing depths more alien to us than the surface of the Moon. To those enchanted by the legend of Moo, it seems a perfect shroud, vast enough to hide a continent, deep enough to bury its cities in silence. But to scientists, the Pacific is not a mystery without rules. It is a basin shaped by tectonic forces, a region where the planet's geology speaks with clarity, and where those laws appear to leave no room for a lost continent. The strongest challenge to Moo emerged in the mid-20th century with the acceptance of plate tectonics. This theory revealed that the Earth's crust is divided into rigid plates floating on the mantle. Continents are formed of lighter, buoyant granitic rock, while ocean basins are made of denser basalt. The Pacific is almost entirely oceanic crust. For Moo to have existed, it would have needed to be a continental landmass with granitic roots. Yet sonar mapping and seismic studies show no hidden plateau of continental rock beneath the Pacific waves. Islands like Hawaii and Tahiti are volcanic peaks, born from hotspots where magma rises through the crust, not fragments of a sunken supercontinent. Geological timescales also defy Churchward's cataclysm. Continents do not vanish overnight. They drift and collide over millions of years. The breakup of Pangaea took tens of millions of years, recorded in fossil distribution and sedimentary layers. By contrast, the sudden annihilation of Moo, 50 million square miles swallowed in a single night, contradicts everything we know about plate motion. Earthquakes and eruptions can devastate regions, as Krakatoa in 1883 or Tambora in 1815 demonstrated, but they do not erase continents. Oceanography sharpened the case. Beginning in the 1950s, sonar surveys mapped the Pacific floor in detail. Instead of a hidden land, they revealed vast trenches like the Mariana, ridges like the East Pacific Rise, and enormous seamount chains. These features fit the model of tectonic plates, subduction zones, and volcanic activity. They left little space for a lost continent's remains. Where Churchward had drawn fertile plains and rivers, science found basaltic crust too dense to support continental rock. Archaeology, too, with its reliance on artifacts, adds to the skepticism. Civilizations leave traces: pottery shards, tools, inscriptions, waste heaps. Egypt has its hieroglyphs, Mesopotamia its cuneiform tablets, the Indus Valley its seals. If Moo had truly been home to 60 million people, it would have produced material culture on a scale dwarfing any known civilization. Yet no such evidence has been recovered from the Pacific Basin. No cities lie drowned on the seafloor, no written records beyond the disputed Niven stones or Churchward's unseen Nakal tablets. Even flood myths, often cited as indirect evidence, face scrutiny. Anthropologists note that such stories are nearly universal, but that does not require a single drowned continent. Sea levels rose dramatically at the end of the Ice Age, drowning coastlines across the globe. Indigenous Australians remember lands now beneath the sea, memories confirmed by modern maps of submerged plains. The same is true in Southeast Asia, where Sunderland disappeared beneath rising waters. These local floods could easily explain the persistence of global deluge myths without invoking a vanished Pacific empire. Science also points out the danger of pattern seeking. Human imagination is skilled at linking similarities across cultures, pyramids, spirals, serpent gods, and interpreting them as evidence of contact. But convergent evolution explains much of this. A pyramid is the simplest stable way to build high. Spirals are natural motifs seen in shells and galaxies alike. Serpents are common symbols of power and transformation, arising independently in many traditions. To scientists, these parallels are not proof of Moo, but evidence of universal human creativity. And yet, skepticism does not silence the allure. Even scientists admit the Pacific holds mysteries. Only a fraction of its seafloor has been explored in detail. Submarine plateaus like Ontong Java and Shatsky Rise are immense, larger than many countries, though believed to be volcanic in origin. Strange anomalies in magnetic striping and heat flow hint at complex geological histories still not fully understood. For believers, such gaps are openings, spaces where the possibility of Moo still lingers. The tension between science and legend is not simply about evidence, it is about imagination. Science demands proof, artifacts, datable ruins, geological signatures. Legend thrives on absence, on the haunting possibility of what might have been erased. To dismiss Moo entirely risks ignoring the cultural power of its story. To accept it without evidence risks mistaking longing for fact. In that unresolved space lies the endurance of the myth. Perhaps Moo was never a continent in the geological sense. Perhaps it was a mosaic of memories, real floods, drowned coastlines, lost migrations, woven into a single tale. But whether or not Moo ever stood upon the Pacific floor, it survives as a lens through which we question our past. What if civilization is older than we think? What if our beginnings lie not in one river valley, but in a world now drowned? The skeptics remind us to look for evidence. The believers remind us that stories can preserve truths science has yet to uncover. Between them, Moo remains suspended, not proved, not disproved, but alive in the dialogue between myth and reason. To move forward, we must explore this middle ground. Instead of a single lost continent, perhaps Moo was a patchwork of many homelands. Doggerland, Sunderland, drowned Polynesian islands, stitched together in memory until they became one. To see Moo in this way is to see not a contradiction to science, but a reflection of it. Not all lost lands are continents, and not all myths describe a single place. Sometimes they are mosaics, fragments of many different events, disasters, and migrations, stitched together by memory until they form one great story. To view Moo in this light is to see it less as a literal landmass swallowed whole, and more as a tapestry of human experience. Floods endured, coastlines drowned, survivors carrying their memories into new lands. The end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, offers a striking backdrop for this theory. As glaciers melted, sea levels rose by more than 100 meters, swallowing entire coastal plains. Whole regions that had once been fertile and populated were erased. In Europe, Doggerland, a vast landscape connecting Britain to continental Europe, vanished beneath the North Sea. Archaeologists have recovered bones of mammoths, tools of Mesolithic hunters, and traces of forests now lying on the seafloor. For the people who once lived there, the ocean's encroachment must have felt like the world itself collapsing. Far away in Southeast Asia, Sunderland stretched across what is now the Java Sea. At its peak, it was larger than modern India, a homeland where rivers and plains supported thriving communities. As the seas rose, this land was broken apart into the islands of Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Today, sonar surveys reveal ancient riverbeds lying beneath the water, ghostly signatures of a drowned world. Local myths from Indonesia and Malaysia tell of great floods, islands lost, and migrations to safer ground, memories that seem to echo the geological record. In the Pacific itself, Polynesian oral traditions recount homelands that once lay to the west or east, swallowed by quakes and storms. Some chants describe islands sinking after the wrath of gods. Others speak of voyagers forced to leave beloved lands and search for new ones. These are not isolated stories. From Tahiti to Hawaii, flood motifs weave through myth like threads of a larger fabric. Each may represent a specific event, a tsunami, a volcanic eruption, the loss of an atoll, but together they suggest a collective memory of lands erased. The Americas preserve similar echoes. In Mesoamerican lore, the Aztec five suns describe previous worlds destroyed by fire and flood before the present age. The Maya tell of floods that swept away earlier creations of humanity. In the Andes, legends speak of Lake Titicaca swelling to cover villages and fields. These myths parallel those of Mesopotamia and the Hebrew Bible, where a great flood cleanses the world. Across cultures, the same refrain emerges: a world destroyed, survivors carrying fragments of memory into a new age. The mosaic theory of Moo suggests that Churchward, and others before him, mistook this chorus of drowned homelands for a single continent. Perhaps the Knuckle tablets he claimed to study, if they ever existed, were not accounts of one empire, but compilations of many flood traditions. Over centuries, these scattered memories, Doggerland in Europe, Sunderland in Asia, lost Polynesian isles in the Pacific, merged in the imagination into a single cradle of civilization, drowned in a single night. This way of understanding Moo aligns with how human memory works. Catastrophes loom large in oral tradition. Indigenous Australians, for example, preserve stories of coastlines as they were 7,000 years ago, descriptions confirmed by geological mapping. To remember such events for millennia requires embedding them in myth, ritual, and story. A single catastrophic flood might inspire dozens of legends, retold across generations, eventually merging into a timeless narrative of a world lost to the sea. Archaeology adds weight to this view. Many of humanity's earliest settlements were built on coasts, where resources were abundant and trade possible. When sea levels rose, those settlements drowned, taking with them untold evidence of early complexity. Today, underwater archaeology is beginning to recover traces of these forgotten worlds. Submerged stone structures off India's Gulf of Cambay, ancient fishing weirs beneath Canada's waters, sunken caves in the Mediterranean preserving human bones. Each discovery suggests that much of our earliest history lies beneath the waves. Seen in this light, Moo becomes not a single continent, but a metaphor for all that was lost when the seas rose. It is the memory of Doggerland's hunters, Sunderland's farmers, Polynesia's voyagers, all combined into one grand myth. The details differ, but the core truth remains. Civilizations rise and fall, and the ocean keeps their secrets. This interpretation does not diminish the legend of Moo. Instead, it deepens it. By recognizing Moo as a mosaic, we honor the fragments carried forward in myth and culture. The serpent gods of Mesoamerica, the flood of Gilgamesh, the chants of Polynesia, each is a shard of a larger mirror, reflecting humanity's shared trauma of a world transformed by water. It also reminds us of our vulnerability today. As glaciers once melted, so they melt again. Rising seas threaten modern coastlines, cities, and islands. In centuries to come, our descendants may tell their own stories of drowned homelands, merging them into myths of a lost world beneath the waves. In that sense, we are already creating the next chapter of Moo. Thus, the mosaic theory helps us understand the legend not as error, but as collective memory. It allows Moo to remain as the forgotten cradle of civilization, not because it existed as one landmass, but because it symbolizes the many homelands that once nurtured humanity before being taken by the sea. If a continent could vanish, if temples and cities were consumed by fire and sea, what would remain of its legacy? Stones crumble, archives drown, and metals corrode, but knowledge has other ways of surviving. It can be carried in memory, embedded in ritual, encoded in story, or preserved through practice. If Moo ever existed, its truest inheritance might not lie on the Pacific seafloor, but in fragments. Pieces of wisdom scattered across cultures, faint echoes of a mother civilization long forgotten. One of the clearest fragments appears in navigation. Long before compasses or sextants, Polynesian voyagers crossed thousands of miles of open ocean with extraordinary accuracy. They read the stars like maps, memorizing the rising and setting of constellations. They felt the pulse of waves beneath their canoes, detecting subtle changes caused by islands beyond the horizon. They studied the flight of seabirds, the drift of clouds, and even the color of water to judge depth. This was not trial and error, but a sophisticated science preserved through chance and oral training. To believers in Moo, Polynesian navigation was not an isolated achievement, but a survival of maritime knowledge once practiced on Moo's shores. Agriculture provides another fragment. In the Andes, Incan engineers constructed terraces and irrigation canals that still function today, channeling water with precision. In Southeast Asia, farmers carved rice terraces into mountainsides, creating landscapes that marry engineering with ecology. In Polynesia, stone-lined channels diverted streams into taro patches. Though separated by oceans, these methods share a striking logic, managing water as a sacred force, sustaining life in balance with land. Was this simply convergent invention, or was it memory? Techniques carried outward after Moo's fall, reshaped for new environments. Architecture also bears traces of a possible inheritance. Across the Pacific, raised stone platforms appear again and again. Ahu on Easter Island, Moai in Tahiti, Heiau in Hawaii. Though each has unique local functions, their form is similar, elevated, rectangular, and aligned with ritual. In Mesoamerica, stepped pyramids rise toward the heavens. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats did the same. In Egypt, pyramids became both tombs and cosmic markers. These architectural echoes suggest more than coincidence. Perhaps they are fragments of a shared blueprint, each civilization remembering in its own way the structures of a lost homeland. Even symbols may preserve fragments of knowledge. Spirals carved into stone appear in Ireland's Newgrange, in the petroglyphs of New Zealand, and in rock art of the American Southwest. Solar discs shine in Egyptian temples and Mesoamerican carvings. The step motif, repeated tiers ascending upward, can be found in Andean textiles and Maya glyphs. To archaeologists, these designs are universal, born from common observation of nature. To those who follow the thread of Moo, they are signatures, a symbolic language fractured yet enduring. Perhaps the most striking fragment is the integration of science and spirituality. In many ancient cultures, farming calendars were tied to celestial observations, and rituals mirrored cosmic cycles. The Sumerians read the stars to measure time. The Maya wove astronomy into their calendar with uncanny precision. Polynesian navigators sang chants that were both sacred hymns and mnemonic maps of the stars. In each case, the practical and the spiritual were inseparable. Churchward claimed this was the worldview of Moo, a civilization where knowledge of the cosmos was not divided from reverence for it. If true, the deepest fragment of Moo may be this unity itself. Skeptics point out that no direct line connects these practices. Polynesian navigation, Incan irrigation, and Egyptian pyramids can be explained as independent innovations. Yet even skeptics admit the similarities are striking, and that oral traditions sometimes preserve knowledge for millennia. Indigenous Australians, for instance, remember coastlines now submerged for over 7,000 years, details later confirmed by modern mapping. If such memories can endure, why not fragments of Moo? Fragments of knowledge also survive in myth. Consider the global flood narratives, from Mesopotamia's Gilgamesh to the Bible's Noah, from Manu in India to Nu in Hawaiian legend. These are not just stories of destruction, but of survival, of knowledge preserved through chosen survivors who repopulate the world. In each version, something essential is carried forward. Perhaps the real fragments of Moo are not physical at all, but the myths themselves, coded containers of memory. Modern researchers are beginning to uncover how much information can survive in such forms. In Polynesia, star navigation charts were passed down word for word, preserving astronomical data without written records. In the Andes, quipu, knotted cords, encoded numbers and perhaps even narratives. In West Africa, griots carried genealogies across centuries. Such traditions prove that knowledge can endure without stone or ink. If Moo survivors scattered, they may have carried fragments of their science in song, ritual, and story. Fragments that later civilizations mistook for gifts from the gods. Thus, the legacy of Moo, if it existed, would not be a single city or monument waiting to be discovered beneath the waves. It would be something more subtle yet more enduring, techniques, symbols, and cosmologies scattered like seeds, sprouting in far-flung lands. Each fragment by itself may seem ordinary. Together they form a pattern, faint, broken, but suggestive of a deeper origin. And so we are left with a haunting question. How many fragments of forgotten worlds live unnoticed in the traditions we still practice today? How many everyday rituals, from planting cycles to festival dances, carry echoes of a drowned civilization? If Moo was truly the forgotten cradle, then we are its inheritors, not through ruins, but through memory disguised as culture. To search for Moo, then, is not only to scan the ocean floor, but to listen carefully to the songs, symbols, and practices of humanity itself. And among those fragments, some of the most tantalizing are the symbols carved into stone, mysterious scripts that may hold whispers of the motherland's language. Symbols are humanity's oldest archive, a way of freezing meaning in a form that can outlive generations. Before alphabets, before paper, people carved spirals into stone, painted suns on cave walls, and etched zigzags into pottery. If Moo truly existed, one of its most enduring legacies might not be buried ruins, but patterns, fragments of a symbolic system scattered across continents. James Churchward believed this deeply. For him, the Nakul tablets he studied in India were not only records of a lost history, but the prototype of human writing itself, a mother script from which all others descended. He called this system the Naga Maya language. To his eyes, the glyphs on the tablets were more than decoration. They were a structured code containing signs for natural forces, cycles of time, and sacred principles. In his books, he compared these characters to markings found elsewhere: the petroglyphs of Polynesia, the symbols on Niven stones in Mexico, the undeciphered script of Easter Island known as Rongorongo. Each, he claimed, was a fragment of Moo's original language, distorted but not erased by time and migration. The spiral is perhaps the most universal of these motifs. Found carved into stones at Newgrange in Ireland, into rocks in New Zealand, and into desert petroglyphs in the American Southwest, it suggests motion, growth, or the unfolding of energy. Archaeologists often interpret it as a solar or cosmic symbol, born independently in many places. But to those who see through the lens of Moo, the spiral is a signature, a glyph of creation preserved across oceans, a common inheritance rather than coincidence. The sun disk is another recurring symbol. In Egypt, the solar disk of Ra shines from temple walls. In Mesoamerica, the Aztec sunstone records cosmic cycles with a radiant face at its center. In India, the Surya icon shows the sun god riding his chariot. How could cultures so far apart all center their cosmology on a shining disk? Mainstream scholars point to the obvious universality of the sun. Believers in Moo suggest these are not independent inventions, but echoes of a solar cult rooted in a drowned homeland. Language itself provides tantalizing parallels. Comparative linguists have long noted similarities between words across distant language families. For example, the root may for mother appears in Indo-European, Austronesian, and even some Native American languages. While many argue this results from the natural sounds infants make, others see a hint of a common linguistic ancestor. Could Moo have been the source? A mother tongue whose syllables dissolved into hundreds of daughter languages after its fall? The Rongorongo script of Easter Island is one of the most mysterious pieces in this puzzle. Carved into wooden tablets, its flowing glyphs depict birds, fish, plants, and geometric shapes arranged in alternating directions. To this day, it remains undeciphered. Some scholars believe it was an independent invention, a mnemonic device for chants. Others suspect it may have connections to Old World scripts, though direct links are unproven. To Churchward and later seekers, Rongorongo was more than coincidence. It was a surviving whisper of Moo's language, preserved on the last outpost of a drowned world. Similar mysteries appear elsewhere. The Indus Valley civilization left thousands of seals marked with symbols. Tiny fish-like shapes, tridents, and abstract signs. Despite decades of study, the script is undeciphered. In Central America, the Olmec produced glyphs that hint at early writing but vanish into obscurity. In West Africa, the Vai script emerged suddenly, its origins unclear. Each of these puzzles invites speculation. Are they independent sparks of invention or scattered embers of a forgotten fire? Churchward argued that the Knuckle tablets provided the key to linking them. He claimed the glyphs represented natural forces: earth, air, fire, water, life, arranged in ways that conveyed both practical and spiritual knowledge. To him, these were not just words but formulas, a science encoded in symbol. Though mainstream scholars dismiss his translations, the idea resonates, that the earlier scripts were not simply for trade or taxes, but for preserving cosmic knowledge from a time when science and spirituality were inseparable. Modern archaeology offers a cautious counterpoint. Studies of how writing developed suggest it emerged independently in at least 4 places: Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica. Each began with simple marks to track goods, then evolved into complex systems for history, law, and myth. Yet even mainstream researchers acknowledge that the speed and sophistication of these systems, particularly in Mesopotamia and Mesoamerica, are striking. Could fragments of older symbolic traditions have accelerated their birth? Symbols also preserve memory in ways beyond language. The swastika, a symbol of rotation and cosmic balance, appears in ancient India, in Greek pottery, and in Native American textiles. The triskelion, a triple spiral, is carved in Celtic monuments and echoed in Sicilian flags. Snakes, feathers, and lotus flowers recur as sacred motifs from Asia to the Americas. Are these universals of human imagination or remnants of a shared symbolic vocabulary from a forgotten source? Even numbers carry echoes. Many ancient cultures revered the number 4, representing directions, elements, or pillars of creation. And the number 7, sacred in Mesopotamia, echoed in biblical tradition and embedded in the 7 levels of Maya cosmology. Churchward insisted these numbers were part of Moo's sacred science, preserved in ritual across the world. The debate remains unresolved. Skeptics argue that human beings, facing similar natural phenomena, naturally developed similar symbols. Spirals reflect whirlpools and galaxies. Sun disks reflect the universal sun. Believers in Moo argue that the consistency of these motifs across time and space suggests more than chance. To them, symbols are the fingerprints of a mother civilization, faint but indelible. In the end, the truth may lie between. Whether or not Moo existed, symbols reveal a deeper reality. Humanity has always sought to encode knowledge in patterns, to preserve meaning against time. These patterns, whether invented anew or carried forward from forgotten ancestors, connect us across oceans and millennia. And so, the question lingers: did the glyphs of Easter Island, the spirals of Newgrange, and the sunstones of Mexico all descend from one drowned homeland? Or do they simply reflect the universal language of the human spirit? Whatever the answer, the search for Moo's script invites us to listen more carefully to what our ancestors carved in stone. For those symbols may be the closest we come to hearing the voice of the forgotten cradle. Imagine a world where science and spirituality were not at odds, but inseparable threads woven into one worldview. In James Churchward's reconstruction of Moo, the Nakal lived in such a world. He wrote that they had mastered primary forces of nature, pure energies harnessed not with wires and machines, but through resonance, geometry, and harmony with the earth. To him, this lost technology powered their agriculture, their temples, and perhaps even the movement of colossal stones. The claim may sound fantastical, but hints of such ideas appear in many traditions. In Polynesia, the concept of mana describes a life force permeating all things, capable of giving power to chiefs, warriors, and even objects. In Chinese philosophy, Qi is the vital energy that flows through the body and the cosmos, balanced through practices like acupuncture and feng shui. In the Andes, Kaosei is the living energy binding people, mountains, and stars. Were these poetic metaphors, or echoes of a practical science that Moo once possessed? Architecture is often cited as evidence of this forgotten mastery. In Peru, the cyclopean walls of Sacsayhuaman fit together with such precision that not even a knife blade can slip between the stones. Some blocks weigh over 100 tons, yet are angled and locked like pieces of a puzzle, resisting earthquakes for centuries. In Lebanon, the trilithon blocks of Baalbek each weigh more than 800 tons, positioned in a platform whose original purpose is still debated. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid's alignment to true north is accurate to within 3 arc minutes, a feat difficult even with modern surveying tools. Mainstream archaeology explains these achievements through ingenuity, manpower, and time. Ramps, levers, sledges, and coordinated labour could, in theory, account for the transport of massive stones. Yet questions remain. How did builders measure alignments with such astronomical precision without telescopes or compasses? How were massive stones lifted and positioned without cracking? And why did cultures separated by oceans adopt such similar megalithic traditions? For Churchward, the answer lay in Moo's lost science. He suggested that the Nakal understood how to manipulate forces within matter, magnetism, resonance, perhaps even sound. He hinted that they could neutralize weight or move objects by harmonizing with natural vibrations. Legends of walking statues on Easter Island, he argued, were not fanciful but memories of these techniques. To him, pyramids were not tombs but resonant structures designed to channel Earth's energy. Indeed, modern experiments reveal curious properties of ancient architecture. The King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid resonates strongly to specific frequencies, amplifying sound like an enormous tuning fork. At Chavin de Huanta in Peru, underground galleries create powerful acoustic effects, with conch shell trumpets producing tones that disorient listeners. The Hypogeum of Halsaflieni in Malta, a subterranean temple over 5,000 years old, is tuned to 110 Hz, a frequency that induces trance-like states in the human brain. Were these accidents or deliberate manipulations of sound and energy? Legends of flight add another layer to the mystery. In the Vedic texts of India, gods ride vimanas, flying chariots that dart across the sky. In Mesoamerican myth, Quetzalcoatl descends from the heavens, often associated with feathered serpents that soar between realms. In Egypt, depictions of the solar bark show gods sailing across the sky. Churchward suggested that Moo's people might have developed craft capable of harnessing energy in ways beyond our comprehension, their memory surviving as myths of sky beings and fiery chariots. Skeptics argue that such interpretations stretch evidence beyond credibility. No physical machines, no metallic tools, no engines or wires have been discovered that predate the known civilizations. They caution against projecting modern desires for advanced technology onto myths that were never meant to be literal. And yet, anomalies persist. How did ancient builders carve and polish granite with such precision? How did they align monuments with solstices and star risings so accurately? How did they transport stones weighing hundreds of tons across mountains and valleys? Perhaps the Nakal did not have technology in the modern sense of engines and circuits. Instead, they may have cultivated a worldview where observation, spirituality, and practical skill were one. To them, sound, vibration, and geometry were not abstract concepts, but tools. The very act of building could be a ritual of resonance, aligning stone, star, and spirit in harmony. In this sense, Moo's technology would not look like ours. No steel cranes or combustion engines, but something subtler, woven into the rhythms of nature. The tragedy of such a system is its fragility. If knowledge is carried in ritual and chant, not books and machines, it can be lost in a single generation of disruption. When Moo sank, its temples and schools drowned, and its science dissolved into myth. Survivors may have remembered fragments, a way of aligning stones, a chant for calling power, a symbol of spirals and steps. Over centuries, those fragments turned into legend. The science became myth, and the myth became story. Yet even as myth, the allure endures. Modern seekers return to these ideas, experimenting with sound resonance, geomancy, and sacred geometry. They ask whether ancient architecture still hums with hidden energy, whether forgotten frequencies can still be felt. And in doing so, they echo the same question Churchward posed. What if civilization's first science was not lost forever, but still lingers in fragments, waiting to be remembered? Thus, the legend of Moo's lost technology is not only about machines, but about a worldview. It suggests a civilization where energy was sacred, where temples were instruments, where sound and stone spoke the same language. Whether literal or symbolic, it offers a haunting vision that the forgotten cradle was not only a birthplace of culture, but of sciences we have yet to rediscover. Picture the sky split with fire. The horizon glows crimson, mountains collapse into the sea, and waves rise higher than temples. In James Churchward's retelling, this was the final night of Moo, a chain of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes so violent that 50 million square miles of land were ripped apart. The earth groaned, the seas boiled, and in a single cataclysmic night, the continent was swallowed by the Pacific. Tens of millions of lives vanished, leaving only scattered survivors clinging to fragments of their shattered world. Churchward described it as if it were an eyewitness account, entire cities trembling, temples collapsing, and fissures swallowing fields of crops. He imagined survivors huddled on mountaintops only to see those peaks torn away by floods. Fire rained from the sky as volcanoes erupted, while walls of water rolled inland and erased everything in their path. In his vision, Moo's destruction was not gradual erosion, but apocalypse. Sudden, absolute, and unforgettable. This story found resonance in myths across the globe. Polynesian chants speak of islands disappearing beneath the waves after the gods shook the earth. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh records Utnapishtim surviving a deluge that swept away all mankind. In India's Shatapatha Brahmana, the sage Manu builds a boat to endure a world-destroying flood. In Greek lore, Deucalion and Pyrrha repopulate the earth after Zeus sends waters to cleanse it. The Bible preserves the tale of Noah, an ark, and 40 days of rain. These narratives, scattered across continents, share the same refrain: a world destroyed by water, followed by survival and renewal. Geology tells a sobering parallel. At the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, global sea levels rose more than 120 meters as glaciers melted. Coastlines were redrawn. Fertile plains became seabeds. For ancient communities, the change must have felt instantaneous. A generation might see their shoreline retreating, their homes swallowed by advancing waves. A tsunami triggered by melting ice or seismic upheaval could obliterate entire settlements in hours, searing the memory into oral tradition. Examples abound. In the North Sea, Doggerland once stretched between Britain and Europe. Archaeologists have recovered bones of mammoths and tools of Mesolithic hunters from its seabed, now trawled by fishing nets. Around 8,200 years ago, a catastrophic tsunami struck, drowning much of this land in a single event. In Southeast Asia, Sunderland was a sprawling continent of forests and rivers, now reduced to scattered islands like Sumatra and Borneo. Rising seas turned fertile valleys into the Java Sea, displacing entire populations. To the people of those drowned coasts, the loss would have seemed like a punishment from the gods, the earth itself betraying them. Even in the Pacific, geological upheavals offer eerie reminders. The eruption of Krakatoa in 1883 was one of the loudest sounds ever recorded, heard over 3,000 miles away. The explosion generated tsunamis more than 100 feet high, wiping out coastal villages. In 1815, Tambara's eruption in Indonesia caused the year without a summer, plunging the world into cold and famine. If such devastation could occur in modern times, what terrors might Ice Age populations have endured? Churchward's account of Moo's sudden destruction may not align with geological science, but its imagery resonates because it mirrors real catastrophes. A supervolcano, a massive earthquake, or an asteroid impact could indeed devastate entire regions. The Younger Dryas event, a period of abrupt cooling around 12,900 years ago, has been linked by some researchers to a possible comet impact. If true, it could explain the floods, fires, and chaos remembered in myths as the Great Deluge. But the legends of Moo's destruction also carry moral weight. To many traditions, catastrophe comes not only from nature, but from hubris. Plato wrote that Atlantis fell because its people grew greedy and corrupt, provoking the gods' wrath. Churchward suggested the Narkal may have disrupted the balance of natural forces they once understood, unleashing energies they could no longer control. In other tellings, the fall of Moo was divine punishment, a cleansing of the earth to make way for new cycles of humanity. Yet in every version, there are survivors. Churchward insisted that Moo's people fled in ships, carrying fragments of knowledge to Asia, the Americas and beyond. These refugees became the seed-bearers of later civilizations, their traditions echoing in Egyptian pyramids, Andean temples, and Polynesian navigation chants. Even in the darkest night, Moo's legacy endured, scattered like stars across the earth. The night of destruction, then, is not merely an ending, but a transformation. It marks the passage from one world to another, from a supposed golden age of harmony to the fragmented civilizations we know today. It is a trauma so vast it demanded retelling, reshaped into myth after myth, until it became the universal story of floods, fire, and rebirth. And perhaps that is why Moo's destruction still haunts us. It is not only about what was lost, but about what remains. The fragments of culture, the echoes of symbols, the whispered memories of survivors. The drowned continent may never be proven, but the human experience of cataclysm is real. We carry it still, in stories that refuse to fade. As the legend continues, the question becomes not just how Moo ended, but how its people endured. What did they carry with them? What fragments of knowledge and memory survived the fire and flood? To answer, we must turn to the legacies of survivors, and how they may have reshaped the world we inherited. Beneath the Pacific, no ruins rise, no temples break the waves. Geologists say there is no missing continent. Archaeologists remind us that no tools, no tablets, no artifacts can be traced back to Moo. And yet the story refuses to sink. Like the statues of Easter Island, it stands against time, silent but immovable, demanding that we look again at what we think we know. What if Moo was never a continent of stone, but a continent of memory? A mosaic of drowned coastlines, flood legends, and scattered migrations, woven together into a single myth that speaks of unity before division. In this sense, Moo becomes the forgotten cradle, not erased by tectonic fire alone, but by the way history chooses which fragments to remember and which to cast aside. Theosophists in the 19th century reimagined Moo as Lemuria, home of an early root race whose destruction marked a step in spiritual evolution. New Age seekers later transformed it into a symbol of harmony with nature, a paradise lost that still lingers in the human heart. Writers and filmmakers made it a backdrop for adventure, a stage where forgotten technologies and star-born beings could stride once more. Every generation reshapes Moo, but each returns to the same longing, a golden age before the fall. Its legacy may not lie in ruins beneath the Pacific, but in the way cultures across the world tell stories of drowned lands, skyborn teachers, and a unity that preceded division. It lives in Polynesian navigators, reading the stars as their ancestors once did, in stepped pyramids rising in Mexico and Egypt, in spirals carved into stone across continents. Whether these are coincidences or connections, they invite us to imagine a deeper origin, one that binds humanity across oceans. Perhaps that is why Moo matters, not because we can prove it, but because it reminds us that civilization is fragile and memory is resilient. It offers both a warning and a hope, that what is lost can still echo, and that what we build now may one day be remembered as fragments of a greater whole. So the forgotten cradle endures, not in maps or monuments, but in imagination. In every story of a flood, in every mystery of megaliths, in every chant that speaks of a homeland swallowed by the sea, Moo lingers. Real or not, it reflects our deepest questions. Where did we come from? How much have we lost? And what more waits just beyond the horizon of our knowledge? And tonight, as the Pacific stretches black and endless, we return to the beginning. Waves break in rhythm with the pulse of time, and somewhere beneath their silence drifts the shadow of a cradle forgotten, a motherland of civilizations that still calls to us in dreams. If you find these stories intriguing, consider subscribing, and tell me, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it where you are? I love watching our map of listeners glow across the world, like stars reflected in a sea that still hides its secrets.